Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and thanks for checking out another episode of the Celebrity Jobber podcast, streaming on all platforms that you listen to podcasts on. Please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating and leave a review. We talk to celebrities about what would have become of them if not for their big break. And I'm pretty sure it's a little known fact that my next guest's big break was that of Cliff Claven from the sitcom Cheers. It was a huge show in the 80s. And John Ratzenberger, who played the character of Cliff Claven, was the fun-loving mailman that showed up to the bar, that had a story for everything, a big-time know-it-all, and a one-upper, if you will. And I'm sure everybody out there knows a Cliff Claven in their life. We'll ask John more about that character. We'll see what John did before acting, some of the jobs he held, and even his first job. Not to mention his career with Pixar, as he's been a voice actor for many years, starting with the Toy Story franchise. John Ratzenberger, who played the character of Cliff Claven on Cheers, is my guest today on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
Hey, John, how are you?
Hey, good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I have so much to discuss with you. I found it so interesting that your dad was a WW2 vet, and he must not have let you get away with a whole lot growing up, huh?
Oh, geez, no. The last thing you wanted to do is get in trouble and have your father hear about it.
Yeah, even if your father was just a regular guy, not a war veteran. That was probably even a little bit more strict than your buddies down the road.
Well, no, I mean, the neighborhood I grew up in, everybody had come back from World War II.
Really?
And, all the fathers were, veterans. My dad, he was Corps of Army Engineers building roads through the jungle of the Philippines for a couple of years. And I once saw a picture of his bulldozer, and it was just all armor plating, and he had to just look through a little slot as he chugged through the jungle, building an airstrip or whatever it was, being shot at.
Wow.
He did that for 2 years. Yeah. It certainly did affect him and everybody that generation, that because they came back and you were just as expected to suck it up.
Right.
No such thing as PTSD. It was just suck it up. Go have a beer, and so all the neighborhood bars, that was your therapy.
Right.
Talking with other guys who had been through the same thing. Yeah.
So Bridgeport, Connecticut, where you grew up, and what did your mom and dad do for work? What did your dad do after his service?
Drove a tanker truck for Texaco.
Okay.
And my mom worked in Remington Arms, making bullets and things, for the military. But she took time off to raise kids, and then once we were old enough to take care of ourselves, she went back to work. So I was a latchkey kid. So right. I became a pretty good cook at 7 years old.
And tell me, I understand you worked at Woodstock. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember that. I was a tractor driver. Just, taking the leaf from my father's book. He, like I say, he drove bulldozers and heavy equipment. So I was a tractor driver and a carpenter, and helped build a stage in Woodstock.
Oh my God! So when did you get bit by the acting bug? Because I know shortly after Woodstock, you moved to London to begin your acting career.
Well, yeah, I was actually working as a carpenter at the time in North Vermont. And I pretty much had it with the winters. And my buddy from college, Ray Hassett, he went over there. He was a social worker. And so he got a postcard from him extolling the virtues of London. And so, what the heck? So I scraped up enough money to get a one-way ticket. And I was only going to stay a week or two, but I ended up staying 10 years. But basically because I was a carpenter, and that's how I could get a job anywhere I went.
Right.
But and he and I formed the improvised comedy duo, and we toured Europe for a lot of those years. And then by the time I got to Los Angeles, I pretty much knew what I was doing.
Right. And tell me, John, a carpenter, you're doing some acting, but what was your very first job? Do you remember the very first paying job you had?
In carpentry or
no,
acting?
In anything. What was your very first job ever?
Sweeping out barbershops when I was like 9 years old.
Oh, wow. How'd you get that gig?
Oh, I wanted to make money. And so it occurred to me there's a lot of hair that needs sweeping. And there was about 5 or 6 barbershops and I had access to my neighborhood. And so I'd sweep them out. I think they were like for 75 cents each time.
Right. Oh, man.
And then I worked delivering potato chips. You familiar with Charles Chips?
Yeah, sure do.
Yeah. A buddy of mine at the time, Buck Marsilio, he had this job, so he recommended me, and I jumped on one of the trucks, and I was the guy who ran the potato chips to the door when the truck pulled up.
Wow.
And then after that, I was a short order cook for a while.
Wow, you did it all.
Flipping hamburgers, but that's what you did.
Yeah.
You got to make money. Then I was a deckhand on an oyster boat. Yeah.
So you're in London for 10 years. You're doing your comedy in London. You get to L.A., and I usually ask people what their big break was. I'm pretty sure I don't have to ask what your big break was because I'm going to guess and say Cliff Claven introduced you to America or the world. Can you tell me who you based that character on? Because I think everybody listening knows a Cliff Claven at their job.
Yeah, it was based on, I invented the character because I had failed the audition. I was walking out the door and I just said, "Do you have a bar know-it-all?" And one of them said, "What are you talking about?" So I picked up a big pen off his desk and I started going into the explanation of the history of the big pen. And I just really wanted them to laugh enough that I could get out with my dignity. But I was based it on really the father of a friend of mine growing up who was a cop, and his father was a cop, but he would come on like he was J. Edgar Hoover. And even though he was, it just cracked me up that this guy took it that seriously. You'd think that, he was, without him, civilization would fail. So that's what I kind of included with Cliff. Cliff is a guy who, he thinks he's the wingnut that holds civilization together.
But isn't it true? You meet a Cliff Claven everywhere you go. There's that guy. He's a one-upper. He's a know-it-all. He's got a story for, like you said, a big pen. He's got a story for everything.
Yeah, and while it's funny, the other thing that I realized is you have to be pretty intelligent to amass all that knowledge. I mean, the story I gave them about the big pen was true of how the company started, and but I did it in such a way that it came out as funny. But those guys, that type of person, that's the person you call at 4 a.m. when you're stuck to the side of the road in a snowstorm.
Right.
They show up. Absolutely, they'll show up. No questions asked.
Right.
But you're going to hear about it the rest of your life.
Yeah. So, John, you play the character of Fritz in Inside Out. It's theaters nationwide next Friday. Tell me a little bit about Inside Out 2. Well,
I haven't seen it yet, and I just I recorded the part for them. But Pixar, they grew again. John Lasseter was the one who started Pixar and built the company, and in fact, really, I think they saved Disney because Disney started distributing the Toy Story and et cetera, et cetera. So I think the money they made just on the ancillary toys and lunchboxes, or whatever, is that goes into millions, if not billions, of dollars. So in real terms, that's John Lasseter, saved that company. But he's with Skydance now, another company, and he runs the animation wing. I just finished a project for him called Wondla. It's on Apple Plus streaming, I think now, or it's coming up. But that's a really good project too. But it's just Pixar. Pixar is Pixar. It's a legendary name now.
It is legendary.
Anatomy of an ad.
And another thing that you're passionate about, John, that you're into, can you tell us a little bit about the Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs nonprofit foundation?
Yeah, I started that years ago and realized, boy, I don't have the skills to run a foundation. And it's run by the Fabricators and Manufacturers Association, and they've done a great job in spreading it. And what it is summer camps for young people to teach them the foundations of manufacturing, how to shape metal, wood, machines, because we're running out of people that actually know how to do those things. And at the end of the day, those are the people we rely on. They're the essential workers. They're not blue-collar workers. They're essential. Without them, we don't have water coming out of the faucets. We don't have electricity coming down the wires, cars, roads, ships, planes. Those are the people that we need. And so that's what Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs is all about. So 300 camps, summer camps nationwide, and they offer scholarships. And if you go to nbtfoundation.org, it'll tell you all about it.
That's nbtfoundation.org. John, do you think if it wasn't for acting, if it wasn't for Cliff Claven, you think that's where you would have ended up? What do you think you would have been doing?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I enjoyed my time in England, and I'd probably still be there doing whatever I did. I've also been an avid sailor all my life, and maybe I always wanted to live on a tugboat. Never got the chance, but I've had boats that are similar. I have no idea. But the way I grew up was, I think the reading of books when I was a kid influenced me in that, the Natty Bumppo, the James Fenimore Cooper, lead characters in books, and Last of the Mohegans, the Daniel Day-Lewis. But those characters always fascinated me, that they would go out into the wilderness not knowing anything, and they'd figure it out on the way, and that really affected me as a kid. So that's what I intended to do. So I don't know what I'd end up doing, but I'd still be around.
John Ratzenberger, it's such a pleasure talking to you, and thanks so much.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you. Keep up the good work.
I'll try. It's a little known fact that John Ratzenberger grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, once again to WW2 vet. And he said basically everybody in his neighborhood had a dad that was a war veteran. And back then, he said, they just kind of came back and said, adjust to the way things are here now and go to the bar if you need to have any kind of therapy. So I thought that was interesting and sad at the same time. John talked about a lot of different jobs that he had growing up. First job, 9 years old, sweeping up at a barber shop. Wanted to make some cash, so that's what he did. He also worked at Woodstock, which I thought was fascinating. Said he took a page out of his old man's book, because when he got back from the war, he was driving a big tanker truck. So John at Woodstock was driving trucks and building the stage and operating heavy equipment. And that was right before he left for England. John was also a carpenter. Went to England to study acting. Met some guy, formed a comedy troupe. Paid his way by being a carpenter, which was another job that John held. And he spent 10 years in London before coming back to the States. Ended up in Los Angeles, auditioned for a role in the show Cheers, which I guess didn't go very well for John. And as he walked out, he said, hey, wait a second. Is there a character, like a know-it-all character at this bar? And what do you mean? And there John grabs a Bic pen and started telling him the history of that Bic pen. And there is the character of Cliff Claven, who he based on a friend of his father who thought that he was J. Edgar Hoover, and he was the guy that held civilization together. Very smart guy, but a little bit of a know-it-all. And I think we all know a Cliff Claven in our lives. Got a story for everything, has a better way to do something. So pretty much assume that was John's big break, getting that role in the show Cheers back in 1981. And, you know, John Ratzenberger has been a voice actor for a long time. He told us the story of how he met John Lasseter, who was the chief creative officer of Pixar Animation Studios. John voiced the character of Ham, the piggy bank in the Toy Story series. He's also been in A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo, and the latest character John plays, Fritz, in the Pixar animated Inside Out 2 in theaters everywhere Friday, June 14th. John is also passionate about manufacturing and put together the Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs nonprofit foundation, offering manufacturing camps, scholarships, and grants to kids interested in manufacturing. John doesn't know what he would have become if not an actor. Maybe he would have built stuff. He was a carpenter. He said, that's a pretty good question, but I'd be around. John Ratzenberger, a.k.a. Cliff Claven from Cheers, a great story. So glad I had an opportunity to chat with him today. And some of our past guests you can check out up on CelebrityJobber.com. You can stream us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We're on them all. You can follow us on Instagram, Celebrity Jobber Podcast, and YouTube.com/the @CelebrityJobber. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast. Until next week, I'm Jeff Zito.